Well, the evening, it was November the 5th, 1976, at the Royal College of Art. And when you got to the entrance into the college, all the glass doors across the front had posters on it saying "A Night of Treason," which sort of set the tone for it.
Yeah.
It was after the punk festival in September at the 100 Club. It was the first time where you saw hundreds of people rather than just 40 or 50, say.
Yeah.
And there were 3 bands on that night. There was Subway Sect, The Jam, and The Clash. And there was a real sense of occasion in the air. There was a lot of energy. Backstage, there were sort of big groups of people, especially the long-term fans who are now getting into bands like Susie and Billy Idol and so forth. So there was a lot of energy of people talking about bands and very excited by the sense that things were really beginning to happen and that there was a movement starting up.
Yeah.
When the Clash came on, I think one of the interesting things about the Clash was that they were very physical, the way they moved around a stage. They would always fill the space.
Yeah.
And this was the first time they'd ever been on a large stage. And they just exploded. They were just all over the stage that night, very hyperkinetic and throwing these shapes. In a way, it was almost like the distillation of what a rock and roll band should be like. They'd studied the books, they'd looked at the videos and the films, and distilled it down into the essence. And this was the night that it really just took off. And it was also the first time, in a sense, that there was a lot of bright light to be able to see them well in terms of taking photographs.
Yeah.
And I positioned myself sort of right behind the back of the end of the peep where all the kids were pogoing and going nuts at the front. So I was probably about 10 to 20 feet back off the stage. And I had probably a 35mm lens on the camera to try and get the width of them all as a group, which I'd been taking them, I'd been photographing them a couple of times before, and it was always very difficult to get them, all 4 of them in one shot, because they kept moving around so much.
Yeah.
And literally running, not just, sort of striding and that, but running across the stage. And even with that kind of vantage point and that kind of width of lens, I only got the shot that we're talking about was the only time I got all 4 of them in the same frame. The rest of the time, at best, I would get 3.
And can you tell me a little bit, sort of in a sensory way, the feeling of taking that picture? Are you aware? Can you remember taking the actual shot, or is the whole evening going to one sort of more of a sort of?
Oh no,
general...
I can remember very clearly. I would. Joe would, because he was the singer, would tend to grab the microphone and kind of use it as a pendulum to lean forward a lot. So he tended to be in the center, and it was quite easy to focus on him. And the other person I would focus on quite a bit would be Mick, the guitarist, because he would run and then throw these kind of big arm movements as well. So it was quite easy to focus. And with this particular shot, I had focused on Joe, and I was just waiting till all of them came into the frame at the same time, and then hopefully there would be a movement that would be one of those key moments where you could capture the vitality and the energy of what was going on into a picture, into a still image. Yeah. And I tended to be watching Joe most of the time at that point, and that's why it's really focused on him as the key. He's the kind of key center of the shot in terms of what people are doing and the looks on their faces and so forth. Because I couldn't keep track of all 4, so I was just watching him and just waiting for moments.
And do you find, when you're taking photographs, are you the sort of, or do you feel you're the sort of photographer that would look and then put the camera to the face, or did you live the moment through the lens, so you just got your camera very stuck to your face, looking through that?
It was very much living the moment through the lens. Yeah. I would just hold it to my face and just wait, and wait, click, and wait, click, and so forth, and then possibly move to another position or take out, change the lens and things like that. But then once I was focused on them, I would just keep the camera in front of me.
And just to tell me, can you try and describe sort of, what you were hearing, how it was smelling, what the light was like, what sort of, were you being jostled?
It was very bright light. It was just all white light. There were no gels or anything being used. It was very bright, and the fact that the ceiling was probably 30 feet high, and there was no proscenium arch or anything like that, you very much felt you were in the kind of center of all this mayhem. The sound, it was loud. It was a very good sound, too, for them, which wasn't always the case. Although, both the Sex Pistols and the Clash had good sound engineers with them, so it always did sound pretty good from nearly the beginning. Their songs were very fast. I mean, they could play a 60-minute set in 30 minutes, which actually was one of their problems when they started off, that they would have played 14 songs and 35 minutes went by, and then a promoter was getting upset because they hadn't been on stage long enough.
And physically, what was around you?
I was kind of in the middle. I mean, it was, 200 or 300 people, so the place was full. And I was at the back of where there were a lot of people pogoing and dancing at the front, which was mixed in also with a lot of people. There was a lot of curiosity. This was the first time many of the people of the audience had seen them. So there's a lot of just standing and watching.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of I was in the middle of people around me were all just standing there and watching it, and then right in front of me were people going nuts and banging into me at times and so forth.
And can you remember any particular incidents from that evening that I think stay in your mind?
Well, the key incident of the evening was that some people started throwing beer glasses from the back of the audience onto the stage, and it was one of the first times it ever happened. And Joe could see them, and so he pointed them out. He stopped everything and he pointed them out and said, "If you got something to say, come up on stage and say it," which prompted this very sheepish-looking guy with long hair and a beard to get up on stage and start mumbling something. And there was actually a conversation between them going on up there. It was very weird because, it had nothing to do with your expectation of how bands go on stage and they do what is essentially a show or a performance. And then Sid Vicious decided that since there was some hippie on stage, he was going to get up there and redress the balance. So he got up on stage and got a microphone and just started mumbling something which didn't really make any sense. And then after about 5 minutes, it was all over and they went back to playing again.
And what was the guy mumbling, the guy with the beard?
Oh, he didn't say anything that you could really hear.
Right.
It was one of these weird things where you kind of took it as being a reactionary reaction, that they were lobbing these glasses like, get off the stage. And the kind of depressing part of it was that you were at the Royal College of Art, which, one, they're art students, so they should be more enlightened, but two, the RCA being a place where several, art movements had more or less started in Britain, and here you were with this music movement, which had come out of art school very much.
Yeah.
It was sort of, it was a very negative thought that that these guys were reacting negatively to it rather than embracing it.
And would you describe, if you had to describe the atmosphere in the room, would you describe it as energetic, violent? How would you?
Oh, the atmosphere in the room was definitely energetic, and in a positive energetic. None of this kind of the fighting or people throwing stuff at the stage had started at all at this point. It was still very much an underground movement, and very much a London movement, I would say.
And at the time, were you known as much for a photographer as a writer? Because you've since become famous for your writing, well known and respected for your writing. But the photographs you took were great. But were you down there as a photographer or a writer, or was it a division?
I started taking photographs because no one else was, basically. Ray Stevenson was shooting the Sex Pistols.
Yeah.
And that was kind of it. And so people like Kate Simon, and there was I'm trying to think, there was another woman who was taking pictures. But there wasn't a really kind of sense of documentation going on. And I just thought that I liked the Clash a lot. I liked what they were doing. I didn't quite understand a lot of it, but it seemed it clearly was something that was going somewhere, and it looked good and it sounded good. And so I'd studied photography at university and had just recently picked up one of these new Olympus OM1s that were quite small.
Yeah.
So I just started bringing it to gigs and taking photographs, not necessarily for any other reason than documenting in a new sense what was going on. Because the other thing too is, as a journalist, I'd been traveling with Kate Simon as a photographer. So in a sense, I didn't need to take pictures because I had somebody with me who was a professional at it and very good, and I could just concentrate on words.
Yeah. I mean, I know we've talked about this in the past, but there are in fact so few photographers that covered this scene, and the imagery is actually there's not very much of it at all, and not very much film, hardly any film at all.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because out of New York, a lot of videos come out from CBGBs in the same time period, and it makes you realize kind of how the tools of production weren't really in the hands of anybody in those days. I mean, nobody had a video camera, and I don't think anybody thought about filming. I don't think anyone had a film camera. I think what's surprising is how little color there is of any of this.
Yeah.
We still very much lived in a black and white world.
Yeah. Well, I was talking to John Savage yesterday, and he's got the Uninhabited London series in there, which of course are all black and white. And I was saying to him, funny, that's how I remember London, which of course it wasn't black and white, but it kind of seems to feel exactly right for that memory of that time.
It's true, and I think when I see color pictures of the early 70s and so forth in London, it does look quite strange.
Yeah.
Because everything was so much covered in soot and dirt that it did look kind of black most of the time.